All right, guys, what's going on? Welcome back to the Everything College Football Podcast. And Nick here doing a preview and prediction for the 2025 Florida State Seminoles college football team. One of this coaching staff, Mike Norvell, returns. He also brings two new coordinators to Tallahassee. Gus Malzahn spent the last 4 years as the UCF head coach, while Tony White was at Nebraska last year, Syracuse before that. He's been an exceptional defensive coordinator. Pretty good offseason, top 20 on both cycles. And we have to talk about last year, Nick. You know, a lot of people, they picked Florida State to make the CFP. Almost every single person did. I was the one person who didn't. I looked at their portal class and I said, this is weak. This is abysmal, specifically on the offense. They brought in guys like DJ Uyunglele, Malik Benson, Roydell Williams to be their number ones. And I was like, this is not going to work. This offense is going to struggle. I still had them at 8 wins, but I was the one person who got it right, not having them in the CFP. And I clowned every analyst that had them in there. I was like, you guys are going to be dead wrong. This team's not going to be that good. I uttered those exact words in our episode last year. Not only was this team not good, Nick, they were abysmal. 2-10 after going 13-1. And of course, they lost a lot of guys to the NFL and whatnot after a very successful season. 2 wins, though, is terrible. I don't want to say I called that because I didn't see that happening one bit. But I did say this team would not be very good, and that just led to even poorer results than I thought. But I hit the nail on the head, Nick. This offense was going to be terrible. They were abysmal. As a whole, this football team was abysmal. I was certainly shocked by how they certainly struggled in areas like the offensive line and on defense. But I seen it coming. We'll see what they can do to resurrect that. But I think this is a good start bringing in Malzahn and Tony White. Your thoughts on what was a terrible season last year, one of the worst ever from a program like this?
If in August 2024 you said Florida State would go 2-10 after going 13-1, I'd like to borrow your time machine and see what I could do with it. No one predicted the fall off that was quite as hard as it was for Florida State, although I do agree the cracks were beginning to show early on. I picked them to make the playoff. I'll put my hands up and say I got it wrong. It was kind of a cop-out. I didn't feel good about it. Of the teams I picked, it was the one I felt by far the worst about, and I had the biggest buyer's remorse about picking them early on. I think that reflects by picking Georgia Tech to cover the spread week 1 or week 0. That is a bigger part. And of course, Georgia Tech not only covered the spread, they won outright in Dublin. And that's when I started seeing alarm bells immediately, and I started changing my tune and realized, man, this team is just not going to be good this year. Again, I didn't think they would get to 2 wins, but at that point I started thinking they were a 6-win team. I picked Boston College to beat them the next week on the podcast, and of course Boston College pulled off a pretty stunning upset in Tallahassee on Monday night of Labor Day weekend, which was a pretty big win for my ego as well as betting-wise. I had a really solid run with that game, but then it really just all fell apart. A complete disaster season for Mike Norvell and company, a complete mess. I mean, and the offense was just absolutely abysmal. We'll talk about that in a second here. You have to only go up from here, but again, I'm slightly concerned because they're running it back with the portal. Now this year's portal class is a lot better than last year's portal class. But again, you're still rolling the dice. You're gambling with portal class. And I'm very intrigued to see what could happen. It's really big boom or bust in the portal. And last year, man, it went bust in Tallahassee.
Now we're going to go ahead and start with that offense for Florida State. And again, this unit was just terrible. You can see the numbers on screen. As bad as it gets, Iowa-esque offense, Nick. But this year in the portal, they did a lot better. I like what they did. They went and got another quarterback. Quarterback continues to be a problem for this program. They don't know how to recruit it. Mike Norvell, yeah, he hit on Jordan Travis, but that still took 4 years before he really emerged as a good starter. And they still haven't really been able to land much. They had Luke Kromenhoek, who's a high-ranked recruit. He transferred out after last season. Thomas Castellanos, though, I think he's certainly an upgrade, and I think he's a perfect fit for Malzahn's offense, though. This is a guy who's a pure dual threat, electric runner with speed, agility, elusiveness. Struggled to be accurate through the air, though. He did improve his game in terms of limiting turnovers last season. Efficiency was still quite low at 61%. Took lots of sacks. Wasn't really comfortable in the pocket, leading the negative plays, and wasn't using the run game as much as he should have been. So poor play led to his benching, but improper use also didn't help one bit. But a couple years back, he had like 1,100 rushing yards, and he really did impress as a runner. And then last season, you weren't able to see that as much. And I think this is a good fit for the offense, Nick. I definitely think he's in over his head a little bit with some of the trash talk he has for the week 1 opponent, considering he did get benched at his last destination. And that's just not the locker room chatter I like to see, because this team was 2-10 last year. You're coming in, and you're really putting a lot of expectations on your shoulders, and that's not a guarantee. And I think this can be a flop, and I just don't like to see Norvell's guys talking like that. I'd like to see them be a little bit more humble, considering the situation they're walking into here is one that is going to take a minute to fix it.
If I'm a Florida State fan, I gotta be upset that my new quarterback is mouthing off at Alabama of all programs. I mean, the quarterback play last year in Tallahassee, Florida State was abysmal. DJU had a horrible end to what was a massively disappointing college career, considering the high billing he had when he first arrived at Clemson. Yes, he had a decent season at Oregon State in there, but man, DJU's career fell apart hard. 1,000 yards passing last year, below 53% comp rate, 4 touchdowns, 6 picks in 5 games. He got thrown to the side. Brock Glenn came in. He was abysmal, 44% comp rate, 4 touchdowns, 5 interceptions. He was miserable. Luke Kromenhoek, who they thought was going to be a good recruit out of high school, he's already left the program as well. He was abysmal, 52% comp rate, and multiple interceptions for him as well. So just a gross quarterback room that was brutal last year. They went to the portal and brought in Castellanos, who got benched at Boston College, the same team that beat Florida State last year in that famous first game, first game for Florida State. I don't really know what the trash talk is here. Saying they don't have Nick Saban to save them. Ridiculous comment. Kalen DeBoer is a phenomenal head coach who has done a lot of great things at other programs. I just don't see them stopping me. Well, half the ACC stopped you last year, so I'm really not that concerned about it. And I would say that Alabama's defense is better than half of the ACC, and that's a very fair assessment to put. Now, granted, he is a good quarterback, right? And it certainly has a talent on the ground, and there are some upside there as well. He was a more polished passer last year, 18 touchdowns to 5 picks. I thought it was a solid performance for him, 61% comp rate. That was a 5% increase from 2023. His legs, when they're used properly like they were in 2023, can be really a dynamite weapon here, right? 1,100 yards rushing and 13 touchdowns in that season. If you can find a way to combine the 2023 rushing with the 2024 passing, you have a very talented quarterback. But if you have this hot and cold where yin and yang, where one is good and one is bad, again and again, I think it's just going to not bode well for Florida State. Florida State fans are hoping they can kind of build together a mold of the two. I fear he's going to probably revert back closer to the 2023 passing levels, where he had 14 interceptions, which is inaccurate and struggled at times. An intriguing prospect, though, if Mike Norvell could hit on this and develop him into a strong running quarterback that's also accurate in the pocket, things could go well for Florida State.
Yeah, last year I felt DJU was not the greatest addition in the portal. I also didn't think they did very good at receiver. This year they did pretty good, though. They brought in Deuce Robinson, athletic pass catcher, great size and ball tracking. I love the hands on this prospect, 6'6", 220. He can be an elite performer. Added some speed in Squirrel White. Last year didn't have much production, but he did have 800-plus yards back in 2023 as a big-time playmaker. And as a possession pass catcher, Gavin Blackwell, he spent 4 years at UNC. Really didn't do much in his time, but it was a crowded room for the Tar Heels. He's going to have chances here. Elijah Moore, 4-star redshirt freshman, 6'4", 200 pounds, should be in the fold as they continue to search for playmakers. Lil Wayne McCoy was the 4th-ranked athlete in last year's class. They also have an incoming 3-star in Javon Boggs, who should get an opportunity as well. Rest of the room is made up of second-year players as well. They also have a true sophomore tight end, Landon Thomas. He did work versus Clemson last year. 7 grabs for 80 yards. Was quiet most of the year, though, as a whole. Looks like he'll be the full-time starter in 25. Randy Pittman comes over from UCF. 400-plus yards last year. So a solid duo there. Pass catcher group is definitely in better standing than last year. Good portal work. I think they should be okay. I don't really have much confidence in the non-transfers because last year you got nothing out of anybody. But again, these are very young guys, so we're going to give them a fair shake when it comes to their analysis, Nick. With the transfer zone, Robinson and White, that's going to certainly elevate your playmaking substantially.
Yeah, I thought the portal add at wide receiver was not bad here. They added some talented players in the skill position. I want to talk about Landon Thomas, who was the only player who really got meaningful reps last year, returning the 175 and the 1 score for him on 14 grabs. I thought was solid enough. He was a younger guy. He's a true freshman, so I think there's a lot of potential with that tight end. Curious to see what his workload looks like. When you talk about the portal ads, Squirrel White's interesting ad from Tennessee. He didn't really play very well last year, but he also saw a massive dip in targets and receptions. Only had 34 receptions last year compared to 2023, where he had 67, 380 yards receiving for him, 800 yards in 2023. So that's why the averages are not that different. He had 12 yards per catch in 2023, 11 yards per catch in 2024, 2 touchdowns across the seasons as well. He'll probably get a lot more targets at Florida State than he was getting last year at Tennessee. So maybe White can find himself back in a good position. He is a very speedy player. Gavin Blackwell coming over from UNC, interesting ad as well. Didn't have a whole lot of catches in his 2 seasons there, but he's a guy that they hope could potentially develop into a strong asset. Deuce Robinson is your best ad, certainly at the wide receiver position. 400 yards receiving, 17.2 yards per grab, and 5 scores last year was pretty solid. Also at 22 yards per grab on 2 scores in 2023. So certainly a big deep play threat opportunity there. I like what they have in that incoming freshman at Javion Boggs, so I think could be really solid as a high-ranking 3-star that they're pretty confident in the slot. Overall, I think this wide receiver room is better than it was last year in terms of portal ads. I still think it lacks a lot of that depth and punch that you need to compete at a high level in the ACC. But overall, I think they've improved a little bit, and you might see some solid improvement in the passing game, which finished 116th in the nation last year.
Now you look at the rushing attack, the running back group here. The best performance they had last season was a $175 against Charleston Southern. I mean, they barely eclipsed the 100-yard mark. They didn't do it very often, and when they did, it was usually in blowout fashion or losses that they had. They did not compete in. Roydell Williams returns, only playing 4 games last year. I don't think he's very good. He is a power back, though, 214 pounds. As a true freshman, Cam Davis got 50-plus touches, only really had one notable game, and that was a 60-yard game against Duke. The only portal add was Gavin Sawchuk, who does have great speed, but his efficiency declined. It was eventually pulled from the rotation as a whole back at Oklahoma. And kind of a forgotten player that I liked from last year's class was Jalen Lucas, a Swiss Army knife-type runner. Only saw 2 games. He was pretty good in all facets for Indiana, though. He should bring some playmaking to the offense, and of course on special teams as well. Last year I thought the room was laughable. Isn't anything special. Probably going to be a by-committee approach. I imagine Davis will be the starter. I still think this room is quite laughable, though, at the end of the day.
Yeah, very weak room. Still, they did not really address the issues there. Roydell Williams had 2 touchdowns on his 26 touches. Outside of that, didn't do a whole lot, but he was a decent power back at Alabama, and he's a physical guy in the red zone or in third and short situations. I think Gavin Sawchuk was a great player at Oklahoma when he was playing his full potential. I liked him a lot on the field. 750 for him, 6.2 yards per attempt, and 9 scores in 2023. He had a brutal 2024. He had to certainly transfer out of that program. Did have a touchdown last year. They're hoping to find a way to get him back more comfortable here. I think Cam Davis is not a bad player who showed a little bit in burst as a true freshman last year, but below 90 yards per game on the ground, 129th in the nation, absolutely abysmal. They were a mess running the ball last year. Should have some help with Castellanos at quarterback, but overall, this is still a rushing attack that I think is very weak. They're going to probably be a pass-first approach, which could certainly cause some problems for them because I think they're more suited with a quarterback that's better with his legs. Overall, a weak rushing attack that I don't have a lot of faith in. I don't think any of these guys in this room are really big difference makers.
I moved to the offensive line. This was supposed to be a strong point last year for them, and I even said that despite criticizing most of the other parts of this offense. Instead, they were awful, helped contribute to that horrible rushing attack. Hit the portal hard, though. Gunnar Hansen, 6'5", 330, was a quality 3-year starter at Vandy. He can play both tackle spots. Also saw action at left guard back in 2022. Adrian Medley, 6'5", 305. He's in the slot in at left guard, as he was great in that position for UCF last fall. Luke Pettibon, elite 2-year starter for Wake Forest. He really stands out in pass protection. Richie Leonard has nearly 1,500 career snaps on the interior. Was pretty good early in the year before getting hurt. He's probably going to be stepping back in at right guard as a starter. Micah Pettis, he was a 3-year starter at right tackle for Ole Miss. He was never, bad. He was never great either. I would say above average at best. I like what they did here in the portal. The offensive line, I think they really improved it in every single area. Starting group has lots of experience and should be much better than last season, especially guys like Pettibon, and Medley. I think Hansen's good as well. I'm very happy with what they did for this group, Nick. I think they certainly beefed up most of this group. They should be better, but I guess we'll just wait and see, right?
Expecting some improvements from this O-line is certainly possible. I think Gunnar Hansen was solid at Vanderbilt, a good add at left tackle. Medley, I think, is a good left guard addition as well. Could be solid. Pettibon, I like what he can do at the center. Richie Leonard, if he's fully healthy, he's a solid asset at right guard. And then Micah Pettis at right tackle. He showed something in some of his experiences at Ole Miss. He may be solid here. A patchwork unit, but I think they did okay with the guys they added here. I don't love a whole new transfer unit on your offensive line. I think that's the most vital part of your team, and that bringing in a bunch of different guys that don't know each other, not played together, I think it's a bit concerning. But overall, Florida State's coming to the portal here, and the portal adds they add, the 4 guys they did add, I do like all 4 of them. I think they're all uniquely capable of providing something for this Noles offense. So I'm not going to hate this unit at all. Probably the best part of this offense. I think you can progress a lot this year and be a lot better in run block and pass block.
Offensive verdict for FSU. You can't get much worse than what they were last year on this side of the ball. Portal work was much better, improving the weapons in the offensive line group. The running back remains underwhelming, and if Castellanos isn't making plays with his legs, then he probably isn't going to be much help. I think Malzahn will do good with this group. He's going to use his quarterback properly. We're still starting from scratch in ground zeros. We were an F last year. I'm going to give him a baseline C+ to get things started. And I definitely think as the season goes on, they'll see him much more competent than they were in 2024.
Just absolutely brutal in 2024. 15.4 points per game. Atrociously bad number, 131st in the nation. About as bad as you can get. Just a gross offense that was not able to produce and do anything. They returned no starters, probably a good thing, because the starters last year were absolutely abysmal. They bring in a bunch of different pieces here. The wide receiving ads, I think, were solid overall. The O-line ads, I think, were solid as well. The quarterback play, I'm questioning that. I'm questioning the quarterback's attitude in the locker room, certainly as well. well. I'm keeping an eye on that, keeping an eye on how that develops. They were solid in some of the games that they lost passing the ball last year. 116th in the nation is still nowhere near where this team wants to be. Malzahn is an interesting hire. If he can kind of bring back some of that magic he's had with some of his other quarterbacks that were more run-first focused at previous stops, maybe something could happen here. It's a wait-and-see approach to this offense. I think a C+, C+, C- is kind of where they are right now. They can develop. They can be solid come the end of the season, but I'm certainly waiting and seeing. They're starting on the ground floor here. Let's see how far the elevator can take them up.
Now I move to the defensive side of the ball. This group wasn't all that great themselves. I thought that it could certainly be because the offense gave them no juice, and I think that they were just lifeless collectively. Because early on in the year, the defense played quite well over the first month of the year. Even against some of the tougher opponents, they weren't abysmal. But still, they were not great when it comes to defending the ground game. They gave up 200-plus yards very frequently, very often. The defensive line had too much beef for that to be happening. Return 4 starters on this defense collectively. Let's start up front. They go to the portal to add DeAndre McCray. Very impressive for Western Kentucky the last 2 years. He's been a standout run defender at 6'4", 274. DeMonte Diggs was a very quality player for Coastal Carolina, 258-pounder who was good versus the run. Jack, defensive end / linebacker spot, likely to be held by James Williams. He was great for Nebraska this past year. 5 sacks and nearly 200 snaps. So I think Tony White's certainly going to opt to run him as a day 1 starter. Amari Williams, 4-star athlete in last year's class, probably going to be at time at tight end, or defensive end that is this season. Interior defensive line, they're going to return a key starter in Darnell Jackson. He's been a really good run defender in his career. Lots of size at 6'5", 337. You have a 310-pounder in KJ Sampson. Saw some time last year, but he was quite poor. Still incredibly young, though. I think he's certainly going to improve. Daniel Lyons, 6'4", 292. He was a good rotational player. Enters his 4th season in the program. Jason Jenkins arrives from Texas. Saw 200-plus snaps last year. Was a pretty good player versus the run and had a few sacks as well. Kevin Green, 6'2", 343. He's the 60th ranked recruit in the incoming class. Not a bad group here. I think they have good players and some nice size as well, but that was the case last year, Nick, and we underperformed tremendously.
They certainly had good size last year, but they did not live up to those expectations, and they were poor last year. Look at the 2 returning players. Darnell Jackson, he's a great player to get back, a really big key asset here. 32 tackles for him last year, 4 tackles for loss, 3.5 sacks, not bad. Daniel Lyons was also okay for this team last year, 25 total tackles, 5 tackles for loss, 3 sacks. I think that's a solid duo to return. Deontay McCray was great against the run at Western Kentucky. 59 total tackles, that is, 3 tackles for loss, 2.5 sacks, 4 QB hurries. He's a big physical asset, 6'4", 275. I like what he can do. That was a solid add. James Williams follows as defensive coordinator from Nebraska. I think he's a guy you want to rely on. At 6'2", 265, he's also a bigger body that's really aggressive. 6'6", 265, that is, I beg your pardon. 14 total tackles, 5.5 tackles for loss, 5 sacks, 4 QB hurries last year. He'll be in a variety of roles. They'll move him around. DeMonte Diggs was good against the run. Another bigger body they're adding. He was solid, a good tackler against the run at times. And then Jamison Jenkins as well. He had 9 total tackles, 2 sacks, and a forced fumble last year, 3.5 tackles for loss at Tennessee. An interesting add in Jenkins there, a guy they could certainly hope to produce something out of. Overall, I think some of the pieces they return as well, Amari Williams, KJ Sampson, are guys that could potentially be solid in their breakout years as well. The defensive line profiles to be pretty solid at times here, but I worry about the run defense. They were not good against the run last year, 107th in the nation, and I fear they may not be as strong against the run again this year.
I move to the middle of this defense. The linebacking group, transfer heavy Stephon Thompson. He's been an elite player in his entire career. Great tackler, good versus the run, has elevated his play in coverage. And of course, Tony White's been with him every step of the way from Syracuse to Nebraska. Problem is, staying healthy has just been a significant challenge for him. He's never really been able to play a full season on a consistent basis. Also got Elijah Herring. He was an elite run stopper for Memphis this past year. He was a starter for Tennessee back in 2023 as well. Caleb Lavelle, he was very impressive as a starter in the bowl game for North Carolina, but limited reps before that across 2 years. People think this is an underrated steal, though. Omar Graham, he was poor in 2023, was better this past year for the Noles versus the run. Pretty efficient tackler. Justin Cryer also saw nearly 300 snaps and was below average. Again, I think the transfers really saved this group. The returners aren't all that polished, and I think the transfers are some pretty darn good ones as well, so I'm impressed that they went to the portal and they're adding guys that can certainly contribute, and I approve of the job Mike Norvell did with the linebackers.
I think this is a solid linebacking group. I start with Elijah Herring, who was good over his past couple of seasons last year At Memphis, 60 total tackles, 7.5 tackles for loss, 3.5 sacks, 2 picks for him. He was solid. I think that's a solid add from Memphis. He was also not bad at Tennessee. In his previous reps, Stephon Thompson, guy out of Long Island there. I think he's a good physical, hard-hitting linebacker. 27 total tackles last year, 2 pass breakups. 2023 was a lot better. 53 total tackles, 4 tackles for loss, 1.5 sacks, 3 QB hurries. He has a good relationship with his defensive coordinator. I think it's solid to see that kind of production following him around. I think, you look at some of the other guys there. I think Omar Graham could be okay. Blake Nicholson could be all right as well. They bring in some other pieces. Overall, the linebacking core, it's an interesting unit. I think it's a little bit weaker compared to other ones in the conference, but there is some high upside potential here of some of these guys.
Yeah, the 3-3-5 that Tony White likes to operate out of will certainly need big responsibilities out of that front six. Moving to the secondary, they're going to lose their top 2 starting corners. Quindarius Jones, though, saw the third most reps and he's going to step into a starting role. Struggled in ACC play, though, but ended the year on a strong note with a good effort against the Gators. Jabril Rawls saw 400-plus snaps and was about average. Jeremiah Wilson, he was elite. One of the nation's best corners last year, matter of fact, for Houston. They hope his ball hawking and playmaking ability will come to Tallahassee in 2025. Kai Bates only saw a few snaps last year in his freshman season. The rest of the group is also incredibly young. I think slot is also up in the air. Earl Little was forward in nearly 200 snaps last year. Edwin Joseph in the second most snaps in the slot was much more stable in coverage, though. Safety group, pretty good standing is Shaheem Brown. He's a big-time veteran of the program. Has been very consistent against the run. Was not that bad in coverage last year. He's not exactly athletic enough to be a center fielder, though, but that's not going to be his role in this scheme. They have a redshirt sophomore, KJ Kirkland. He was a standout versus the run. Was below average in coverage, but he did impress at times. Behind them, Conrad Hussey. He was very weak last year, nearly 200 snaps. Ashland Barker and a few less was pretty impressive late in the year. So I think this is not a bad safety group. I think they certainly have to convert what they can do in terms of this new scheme, though. I think overall they're quite iffy. The cornerback group outside of Wilson's pretty much in flux. I think the safeties can be strong with its starters in depth. But again, the respect is going to have to be earned with this group, Nick. It's not going to be given.
The secondary has some interesting pieces. They return Brown, their top tackler on the team overall. 70 total tackles, tackle for loss, 2 pass breakups, and safety. He's a solid player. KJ Kirkland, 46 total tackles, a tackle for loss, 2 pass breakups. He was all right for this team. Ashland Baker was, not great. 19 total tackles, tackle for loss, and a pick last year. Same thing with Conrad Hussey. 18 total tackles. He struggled, or little struggled. He was not great for this team. 15 total tackles and a sack for him last year. Interesting pieces overall. They bring in Jeremiah Wilson from Houston. He was really good for them last year, right? I think he profiles to be a really strong asset here. 24 total tackles, 3.5 tackles for loss, 4 picks, 4 pass breakups. Hopeful to get more out of him. I think he's a good physical player. Kai Bates, that is, they're hoping to get a little bit more of outside there as well, trying to move him around. They have Rawls that returns, who was not great for them. Jabari Rawls, that is, at 14 total tackles, who may start at corner. Overall, this is a secondary that's solid. The safeties are really good. The corners, I'm a little iffy on the corner play in Wilson or Rawls, depending on who they end up going with at corner. Curious to see what they do there. But overall, this is a team that has some solid assets in the secondary, and they were good against the pass last year, right? A top 50 unit in the nation, holding teams about 200 yards per game. If they can find a way to play at that same level and improve the run defense, maybe things could profile a lot better for this defense.
We're going to go to the defensive verdict for FSU. They weren't all that good last year. They got smoked on the ground, gave up 7 games of 200-plus yards. I think the talent level and having Tony White in the fold makes them dangerous. To get right back in the fold is one of the top defenses in the country, but they still have some holes and they won't be perfect in their progression in 2025. They'll be better, but above average at best, and I'm still going to give them a harsh grade of a C+. I just got to do that with FSU, Nick. I'm giving them baselines here because that's how poor they were last year. That's how underwhelming they were. I think that's where we're going to start and see where it ends up.
Look, when you go 2-10, you deserve baseline grades. The defense had some positivity last year. At times, about 28 points per game wasn't an atrociously bad number compared to some other parts of the team. Thought the pass defense was good last year. The secondaries this year, the secondary has some decent pieces, like what the safety unit can do. I worry about the run defense, although I like some of the portal adds in defensive line. Same thing with linebacking core. I think, the whole front part of this defense his new look out of the portal, and that I think is big, iffy, and a concern for me. This defense should be okay this year, should be a middle-of-the-pack unit in the ACC, but I don't know if that's enough to get this team to the goals that they want to get, rebounding from what was a horrific season last year.
Now I move to the schedule and the prediction. Look, FSU's coming off one of the worst seasons imaginable by when, a top-tier blue blood program, and now turned to the portal to improve its bad weaknesses. I think the offense will be much better, and Norvell being urgent to upgrade his staff was a really good move that I think is going to do wonders for him. 7 to 8 wins this year should happen. We need to just put 2024 behind us, as this roster has seen a good amount of turnover. If the staff can just put it in the rear view as well, then they'll play well. But, confidence is low. They need to regain it fast to get the results they're capable of. What a great opportunity week one to do that, Nick, hosting Alabama. They're looking for blood as well after a bit of a disappointing season. About 2 touchdown favorites right now. If Alabama doesn't improve their weaknesses from last year, that's definitely a winnable game for FSU. If they can play with that confidence, they can run Malzahn's scheme, they can certainly keep it close. And, man, I think they need to. If they lose 45-10, I know you got a couple of tune-ups here, it's probably not going to be all that great. At Virginia, I think it's going to be tough. They're going to lose the conference opener. The first 3 of them, that is. I think they'll get some freebies against Stanford, Wake Forest, and they'll knock off Virginia Tech. This isn't an easy schedule by any means. I think Miami, Pitt, Florida, NC State, Clemson, those are all going to be tough conference opponents. They're going to be far better than Florida State. They can win 8 games, Nick. They can certainly get back on track. It's just hard to feel that way right now about them. I don't know what this season really is going to look like. I don't even know how week 1's going to go. Part of me thinks it could be close. Part of me thinks it's going to be bad. So I'm not sure. It'll be interesting to see. All I know is I'm glad I'm not a fan in Tallahassee of this football program right now.
This is not a team you want to be a fan of. I mean, they went 2-10 last year. They were a consensus top 10 team that lost in week 1. I mean, it's not often you have a top team like that lose early in the season. I mean, they could have rebounded, right? They could have bounced back. When you look at 2007 Michigan, the team I think about a lot, that lost to App State week 1, who was in the FCS team at home, and then got blown out by Oregon the next week. They could have folded in the towel, and that 2017 that was a top 10 team at the start of the year could have just completely quit on it and called it a day. But they ended up rattling off a bunch of wins. They got to 9 wins that season. Florida State didn't do that. They completely folded under the pressure, and they only won 2 games last year, and one of them was against an FCS opponent. They were just absolutely abysmal across the board. They really just were not there to play. The team had a whole revolving door of cast of characters that were absolutely brutal, and Mike Norvell, I thought, really didn't show himself to be a good coach. I think they'll improve this year. I think they'll go 5-7. They'll win some of those easier games on the schedule. I think they'll knock off Stanford, Wake, and Virginia Tech, and those are games they can certainly find themselves winning. But things could also go bad again here. I don't think it can go as bad as it did last year. The portal, again, they're relying on the portal. Yes, this portal class is better on paper, but some people said last year the portal class was good. I know you didn't, I know I didn't, but people were singing the praises of some of those portal ads. So you're rolling the dice with the portal. It could boom, it could bust. It absolutely busted last year for Florida State. I don't think they'll be very competitive week 1 against Alabama. I think Alabama's got a massive point to prove, and will come into Tallahassee looking to do so. I think they'll suffer lopsided blowout losses to Clemson, Miami, Pitt, some of the tougher teams on the schedule, Florida as well in the rivalry game. I think Virginia will have a great day against them, put up a good showing on September 26th. They'll get some conference wins. They'll improve their standing a little bit. They may even fight for a bowl game if something goes their way, potentially at NC State late in the season. I'm still low on Mike Norvell. I'm still low on Florida State in general. I think the stock on this team is low. They've struggled last year for obvious reasons. They were absolutely abysmal here. It's hard to see them make a massive leap and jump to a bowl game in just one off season. I think it's going to be a slow, steady progression here. I'm curious to see what type of leash Norvell has in Tallahassee, because they expect to be a top-tier team competing for national titles, and they are far away from that. They are about as far away from that as I feel like they can be right now. Curious to see how this team progresses. A team I'll certainly be keeping an eye on, and that week 1 game obviously is a very intriguing matchup against a top-tier opponent, Alabama. We'll see what happens this year. We'll see what Mike Norvell can steady the ship in Tallahassee.
Yeah, I was going to ask you that. What's the future look like for Mike Norvell? 2023 was a phenomenal year. I thought that was a great team that could have even won the national championship if their quarterback doesn't get hurt and they had an opportunity to do so. But that's what we're doing, is we're just going to the portal every single year for every single position. We're not recruiting anybody. Out of all the top-tier programs, our situation at quarterback is probably the weakest, and we can't figure it out. And again, yeah, Travis panned out after 4 years. He's got to go, quite frankly, Nick. I don't know if 5-7 gets the boot. And there's obviously, we talk about this all the time, there's not too many guys you want to give the keys to potentially that are up-and-coming coaches. You might have to do what USC did, go out and make an unexpected splash. LSU did that as well with Brian Kelly. They're going to have to get aggressive. I think Deion Sanders will be the future head coach here, because I feel like he could do better potential on the recruiting trail. That's not something he's really committed to either, so I don't think that might be the ideal fit, because he's also going to be a portal-heavy guy. I think he could have more success in the portal at FSU. They're in a tough predicament. I don't know what they're going to do here, because there's a lot of weaknesses here. We have very few guys we're developing and turning into stars. It's just a disaster, thick and through. Just 5-7 lead to a new head coach being hired.
You got to think it's possibly in the cards. I mean, you're not paying a guy $10 million a year to win 5 games. What are you paying $2 million a win for the boosters? They're not going to like that. That's a steep price to pay for wins in college football. That contract, which they made in the wake of Saban's retirement to try and avoid Alabama poaching Mike Norvell, may turn out to be a deal with the devil and one of the worst contracts that could be signed, because that buyout's going to be hefty when they have to do so, if they have to do so, which I think it's not an if. I think it's when they're going to have to buy him out at this moment in time. This team team was brutal last year. I don't think they're going to get as good as they need to get to prove to people that they're ready to compete on a national level. I don't think Mike Norvell is a bad coach necessarily. He won 10 games twice at Memphis. That's not necessarily easy to do. He also won 10 games twice at Florida State, including that season where they missed the playoffs, which was still the right decision after all this time. But he may get the boot sooner rather than later. I think if they go 5-7, there'll be a lot of cold feet from some of those higher up donors at Florida State. This is a program that wants to win national titles. They won a national title not that long ago. I think people forget that was less than 15 years ago they won a national title. They were a competitive program under Jimbo Fisher. They were one of the top dogs in the ACC and the nation before they got knocked back a peg by Clemson and have really not recovered other than that single season where they ended up winning the ACC in 2023. I don't think Mike Norvell is a long-term future. I don't know who the long-term future is. Deion's health concerns, obviously, we're very happy. Both of us are very happy that he's healthy and able to coach right now after his health scares, but that's something you have to always consider when looking at Deion Sanders and going forward. I don't think the health issues will go away, unfortunately, for the Hall of Fame player and now great head coach. I don't know who exactly would be the right target for Florida State because I think this is a program that's got to go back to their roots. They got to just recruit strong in high school. There's a ton of talent in the Florida region. I know it's a very competitive region as well, but you got to be better at recruiting in high school talent from your state and from other states on the Gulf Coast. I think going to the portal every single season is unsustainable because it's just got too much of a gamble and it can lead to absolute disasters like a 2-10 season. If things don't go great this year, if they go 3-9, 4-8, he's certainly out the door. 5-7, maybe make the case you keep him, but I could certainly understand the case for letting him go as well. This is a team that a lot of people are keeping a close eye on that hot seat. I think it's a lot warmer than people ever thought it would be this quickly.
I think maybe you try to give Kenny Dillingham a phone call, see if he wants to leave his alma mater. If not, we're just going to stick back and run it back with Norvell for 2026. That's going to be it for today's episode. Make sure you guys like, comment, subscribe. See you next time.